Right. So, welcome to our second lecture on configuration management. In the previous lecture, we discussed the part one, which just sort of introduced our configuration management. Here is planning for configuration management. We did discuss that. Important points there were about, as it says there, identification and control and status and evaluation of our configuration management. Um, yeah, we did talk about all of these points that are included. A very big point there was about the configuration item, which is going to be the, I suppose you could say, the atomic unit or the smallest unit that we're going to store information about, which sort of maps directly onto hardware, software, and documentation of our system. And the benefits of configuration management, can you imagine how much better it is to have a map of your systems rather than not having it? So think of it like a blueprint to a very busy, important hotel or something like that. Something goes wrong, you know where to go to fix things. And you can plan for expansions and things like that. So these points here were about parts of the ITSM into which configuration management fits, and yeah, how that sort of that works for us. And this is detail on the relationship between change management and configuration management, and how updating things on the configuration management system is going to be part of the change management system. That should happen. Okay, so that brings us to part two, which is where we left off last time. And I just want to sort of pick up here and let's go through and have a look at these other points about configuration management. So as it says there, configuration management is going to give us a model from which we can understand our system. And using that model, we'll be able to do these things. When incidents occur, we can look at our model, which, as I said, is kind of like a blueprint of our system, and we can see how those incidents affect our system. We can plan upgrades, plan new services, and if we're going to have a change. So basically what we've done is we've taken our system and we've abstracted it, right? That's what a model is, right? It's something that we can look at that represents our system, but it's simpler, and because it's abstract, when we have abstract ideas that are going to affect the system, plan changes, we can just look at the model and say, oh, look, if we made this change, this is how we expect our system will change, because we can see the change in the model. And so hopefully that makes sense. So the core of that, what's going to hold the configuration management system together, and going to be the repository of all of this beautiful model, is our database, which we refer here to as the configuration management database. And as you can see, the configuration management database is going to interact with all of these things. They're going to be part of it, right? So you're going to have a hardware inventory. That'll be a bunch of files which are accessed or are part of the configuration management database. Likewise, our contracts, software inventory. Notice there's a few things there of inventory, because I told you that the configuration management system is like a blueprint. And so, a blueprint is going to, maybe I should define my term blueprint. What I mean by that is an architectural drawing for a building. Sometimes we refer to that as a blueprint. Could also be for a large piece of manufactured, like a ship or something like that. It's going to have very detailed plans of everything and how it all fits together. We call that a blueprint. And so a blueprint of a building, architects use that. It's very important. You'll see that all the way through the building process, they're going to be referring to the blueprints, and they update them and change them. And then even after the building is complete, the blueprint stays with them, and they look at it from time to time. Every time they want to do any updates or maintenance, they'll look at that. And you can think of, so that's why you can think of the configuration management system as taking that role, as being like the blueprint, the place to which we're always updating any big changes that we have, and the place where we look when we want to see what we think is going to happen if we make some changes. or if some incidents occur or something like that. A point on that slide that I just went past was that configuration management system also is going to include items from other parts of the organization which are impacted by the information system. It's not just our IT stuff. So human resources, engineering, etc. We're going to have points in there from them as impacted by the system. And so here's a database example, data that's going to be stored. And what are the things that we're going to store? We call those things configuration items. And the configuration items, we record what they are, details about them, their serial number, their owner, their location, other physical details of the equipment. We'll record relationships between them, on the system and how they work with our software and our documentation. Scope refers to that idea of in a universe of things, the scope that we are concerned with um, has some things which are within it. Those are the things that we concern ourselves with, and anything outside the scope we do not. That's really important for your project idea. So you guys were handing in for me for your task 2, and the first sort of accessible part of that was that you understood the problem. And we said that there was a SOW, which is a statement of work, which I also referred to as a scope document. So in other words, we understand in the universe of things that there's lots of things that we could do, but these are the things that we're going to do. We're limiting ourselves to that. So that's why it's called a scope. It's sort of an exclusive sort of idea. Okay, so this is a slightly different term, right? We've just been talking about the configuration management database. So that's our repository, but it's a database system, which means that it's dynamic. We add things to it, we change, we can query it, etc. But that forms part of what we call the configuration management system. So there's other things besides the database, right? So the database, and there's a network, which makes that configuration. There's going to be layers of software and forms, etc., that make it possible. And so here's some of those other things. We're going to have user interfaces, so that software layers, logical views of the infrastructure. There's going to be some infrastructure that's going to support the database system. Discovery tools. So for example, if you've ever been using database management systems like SQL, discovery tools there would be like your query language. So you could have some kind of languages and tools that allow you to query your configuration management system. Audit tools, inventory tools to ensure the hygiene, if you like, of your data in your database. That it is in fact not corrupted in any way. And any of you who've done any database, I don't know if you do it in your course. You guys are hardware students, but if you've done database studies, you know that that's a very, very important part of managing a database is making sure that the records are maintained. I called it database hygiene, but that it's not corrupted, that we haven't corrupted our database. Now, this idea of a baseline. So if you think of a baseline, that's a place from which you can start and then come back to and look at and measure your progress. And so we can get a baseline by looking at other businesses, or we can, as it says here, we can take a snapshot of our own business. That could be a baseline. And then any changes that we make, we can compare that to the baseline. The baseline is going to make it easier for us to do a recovery if we have some issue with any implementation that we've made. And so that's what's mentioned here. We can back off from any changes by going back to the baseline. We can do an audit. An audit is going to tell us what's the current state of our system. So at any time we can say, all right, let's go and check the current state of our system, and we'll compare it to the baseline, which was like a snapshot that we took of our system like a few months ago or something like that. As maybe we've come to the end of a development of a new module in our system, and so a baseline we can sort of lay that down as a marker here. It refers to as a milestone, and that we can say, all right, we've finished that particular part of our project. Let's take a snapshot of it, and then we can compare our progress later. All right, so kind of lastly, we're almost to the end of this. We have this cycle, which has been previewed in an earlier slide in this slide deck, right? The idea being if we're going to have a configuration management system, we're going to have some processes that work together in kind of like a cycle. And so those processes are going to be, we're going to start things by planning. Planning, what is it that we want to do in configuration management? We're going to have a plan for that. We're going to have some kind of a project to put together a configuration management system, and it's going to have a start and end date, that kind of thing. Then we're going to identify what are the things that we want to record in our configuration management system. We refer to those as our configuration items, our CIs. So uh, we're going to specify the types of things that we're going to record in our configuration management system. You know, there's going to be your hardware, your software, your documentation, and then what kind of detail we're going to record about each of those things to put as data in our configuration management database. Then the control, I mean, you're going to have some kind of rights and permissions for updates and changes. That's particularly mentioned in change control, right? So some of the control is going to come from our change management, but there will be there'll be a hierarchy, I imagine, in your organization on who can make updates to the configuration model and what is the process for making those updates, etc. So you'd probably have some kind of a committee that reports to a hierarchical structure. Then on a regular basis, there'll become some kind of reporting on the status of the configuration management system and an audit of all the items in there, and any changes that need to come will come from those things. Then lastly, we're always going to go back and sort of plan. So you can think of this as a cycle. It might be a fixed time cycle, like every year we go and we review what's in our configuration management system with the view of planning updates. So there we go. It's a little bit more detail about planning. When we go into our planning, we need to sort of, as I was saying, decide where we're going to go with our configuration management system, have some kind of a design for it, come up with some ideas on how we're going to name and store our configuration items. Then the identification, as it says there, it's the biggest part of configuration management. Once we've decided what kind of items are going to be our configuration items, we need to go about sort of finding them all and identifying them, labeling them, registering them, giving them unique identifiers, and recording them in our database. So at a network in a college like this, we'd go around and we'd put little labels on all the equipment. You know, they've all got asset, we call them asset numbers or whatever. Yeah. And so we have an asset register database, which is going to be part of our configuration management system. And so, yeah, if you come to the college and have a look, you'll see all the monitors, all the computers, everything in the telecommunications boxes. They are all labeled and they all have a unique identifier. And so the idea, and actually they even have like barcodes on them. So to make that process easier, so that people can go around and just scan all those bits of hardware, and then they can add into the database where those hardware are, and we can do the audit and make sure they're in the right place, that type of thing. And so I've just mentioned that we can put asset registered markers on our hardware, software packages, but we also need to record these other things, and they're not going to be recorded with an asset register label. We are going to have to do it in another way, but we can put electronic tags onto electronic items and keep those recorded in our database. As I was mentioning about the control, there must be some some process for any changes, any updates to be made, and that's going to be related to our change management. But yeah, we need to go through that process to make sure that any new items are recorded properly, any updates are recorded properly, requests for change go through change management, anything that happens in change management is recorded, etc. And then so we're going to have some reports. The thing here that that diagram should represent to us is that this is going to happen in a regular basis over regular periods of time, like monthly, yearly, or 6 monthly, that type of thing. And from that, we'll be, so supposing it's June and our last report was in February, we can prepare a report now, and then we're going to look at the trends, see how things have changed in our configuration database, what's been uh, the activity level of sort of adding new configuration items. What kind of incidents have we had? Is there any relationship between them? There's all kinds of things that managers can do with that, and hopefully that would be useful to them. Um, we want to make sure that the information in our configuration management system is correct. And so that's where the verification and audit comes into place. So of the simplest kind of audit that you could think of would be like your asset register audit. And how that would work is that, as it says there, at a regular interval, you just send somebody out into your workplace and just check the actual location of every hardware device, as opposed to the location that's recorded in the configuration management database. And then they would be compared. And if there was a lot of irregularity there, that is, if the actual location didn't match with the location in the database, well, that would come into a report as a sort of a negative comment. On the other hand, if almost everything was recorded as it was, then that would be reported as a good thing. So this helps your managers to sort of stay on top of the configuration management system so that they know that it's correct. And the last slide, I believe, is about the KPIs. I hope that you've heard of that term before. So it's a management term, key performance indicators, KPI. So key performance indicators, what that means is these are the things that we will look at to see if what we're trying to do is working well or not. So that's why it's called a key performance indicators. Is our performance doing well as per these indicators? Now, specifically, so I mean, I just spoke about key performance indicators generally, but specifically key performance indicators for the configuration management system. So, is our configuration management system performing well? That's what we mean by the key performance indicators. If it is, then maintenance and scheduling will be improved. If it is, underutilized resources, so that could be hardware, software. A classic one of this would be licenses for software, right? Companies go out and they buy a bunch of licenses for software, and maybe they only use 10% of them, and the rest are sitting around. That's a cost that didn't need to happen, right? And so in your configuration management system, you've recorded all the software licenses that you own, and then you'd record how those things have been allocated across the organization. And if they haven't been allocated properly, then that would show up in your reports, you hope. But if they haven't, that would mean that that's kind of like failure in this particular key performance indicator. That means if they haven't been working properly, that means that your configuration management system is not being utilized to its best potential. So, oh well, there you go. Just talking about that, right? Paid licenses that we're not using. Budgeting information on assets. Again, maybe we have assets around that are not being used. Maybe assets are being used in a way that they're not supposed to be. People are taking them out of the organization. If with our configuration management tool, we should have all those things recorded so that we can identify that. When there's a service failure, do we know where the asset is that was involved in that, etc. So the idea of the KPIs that I'm showing you there is that the configuration management system has a real purpose in the scheme of things in ITSM and information technology service management, but in the broader business itself, right? If our configuration management system is working well, then these things are in the plus column, and this is giving a benefit to our IT systems, and it's giving a benefit to our business. And I think that's the last slide. It is. So I'm going to pause there